Hello, everybody. Welcome. I hope everybody this side of the water has figured out we're going an hour earlier because of American moving to summertime. If you're not, then sorry. So today's guest is perfect for this week, given it's St. Patrick's Week. Our guest is Dan Mulhall, who is Ireland's 18th ambassador to the United States, where he took up his post in 2017. A native of Waterford, he studied at UCC, where he specialised in modern Irish history, and he joined the Department of Foreign Affairs in 1978, and has had assignments in New Delhi, Vienna, Brussels, Edinburgh, Malaysia, Laos. Where else has he been? He's been to Germany, he's been to London, and obviously now he is in the US. So Dan, thank you. Welcome, welcome.
It's good to be here. Thanks for the call. Thanks for asking me to come on your show.
And you've had a busy week, virtually.
Yeah, I have hardly stirred from this spot, but it's been a very busy week. I've been in the office, I've been in the vice president's office, I've been in the speaker's office, all without leaving my seat here in front of this Zoom call. So it's been an amazing week, really. I mean, it was a full program for the Taoiseach, like as if he was here, but of course all of it was done remotely, which was something special and new and different, but the content was much the same as what we would have had the Taoiseach been here in a normal year.
And the Shamrock made it early.
Shamrock made it through. It always has to come early because it takes a long time to get it through the system and to get it into the Oval Office. They don't allow anything to go in there without being properly, fully checked. So it arrived about, I'd say, 4 or 5 days before the event itself, and it was there and it was sitting in a position of honor when the cameras were turned on.
And guaranteed COVID-free Shamrock it was, of course.
It's grown in Ballinskellig, so you can imagine how pristine it is with the air down there. You couldn't get Shamrock better anywhere in the known world. I mean, that Shamrock was born looking out at the Skelligs, for goodness sakes. What else do you want? What more can you ask for, eh?
What more authentic than that?
If you're a Shamrock, you want to be grown in the Ballinskelligs area, I reckon.
So Dan, you were born in Waterford, you studied at UCC.
That's right.
Were there any other dreams for your job, for a life, or were your eyes always on a life in foreign affairs?
Certainly not. I think I wanted to be a rock star and then a football star. Both of those were ruled out by my lack of a voice and my lack of musical skills and my lack of sporting prowess. I've been a keen sportsman all my life, but not very good at any sport I've ever turned my hand to. So I had to give up those dreams pretty early on. And I then thought I'd become a teacher in my local school because that was the main role model I had growing up. And then when I went to college, I realized there was a bigger world out there. And then I started thinking about an academic career. And I was on my way to the ANU in Canberra. I had a fellowship to go there to study for a PhD after I finished with Joe Lee.
Have we got a problem there?
I think we might have.
I think we might have a problem in the embassy. I hope, as long as this didn't happen Patrick's Day, then we're okay. Let's give it a few seconds, Dan. If you have a problem there, Dan, it might be as well to just pull out and come back in if you can hear us. I think you probably realize that you're gone. So just pull out and click back in might be the way to go, I think. Everything was working very smoothly until a couple of moments ago.
And already St. Patrick's Day week, Joe.
Not as exciting as Dan Mulhall, just like him. I was in the one place throughout, but I wasn't entertaining important guests or anything. It was very quiet. It was very sensible. There wasn't a drop of Guinness to be had. That's to say is that I'm in Dublin, of course, and as you know, we're much more locked down over here than Dan Mulhall is over in Washington. He was just telling us as we spoke beforehand of just how much more at ease and how excellent people are in Washington at actually behaving themselves properly. Hello, you're back, Dan. I'm sorry, I didn't get that to us. I'm sure that's
there. I just got pumped out for a moment, so let's hope that's the end of it now, and I'm back on a permanent basis. Where did I finish? Where did I end up?
You were just thinking about heading off to ANU.
And
yeah, I got a scholarship to ANU, and I was heading off there to do a PhD in international relations. And a friend of mine at college encouraged me to apply for the job in foreign affairs. I kind of didn't really think it was for me, but I was persuaded that I should apply for it. And lo and behold, I got a call to offer me a job in March of 1978. And, I reluctantly decided to forego my my Australian scholarship and joined the Department of Foreign Affairs on the 31st of March 1978, and I've been there ever since. When I first joined, I thought I'd probably stay a few years, and then I probably had my eyes on going back into academia, I would have thought, because that was where I felt comfortable. And but after once I went to my first posting in Delhi in 1980, then you sort of start to realize the advantages of representing your country and the joy of doing it, and it sort of stays with you. And I certainly wanted to repeat the experience, and I've been in the service ever since. I've took a couple of years in Australia, do some teaching there at Murdoch University in Western Australia, where my wife comes from. But that's my only time out of the service in 43 years. Otherwise, I've been a consistent member of the Department of Foreign Affairs. I've now had 9 postings with Foreign Affairs, and I've enjoyed every one of them in their own way.
It's worked out well, Dan.
It worked out well. Yeah,
I mean, career trajectory.
I mean, I would never have, even 10, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I'd never thought I'd end up in doing postings in Berlin, London, and Washington. But I'm delighted that it's worked out that way, and I've enjoyed every minute of my career, and I continue to enjoy it. Actually, I'm not pining away for any kind of retirement or anything like that. I'm happy to do this job for as long as the government wants me to do it.
Excellent. Before I know Joe's got a question, but before you do, Joe, anybody out there, if you've got a question for Dan pertaining to his life, his career, St. Patrick's Day, things American, things Irish, please do stick in the Q&A box. Joe.
Thanks, Dan, actually. And it's very clear that you do enjoy the job that you're doing and doing it so awfully well. And this question, I suppose, is kind of on behalf of my students and people like that. And you can answer this with as much modesty as seems proper. What does it take to enter the diplomatic corps? Let's even say to rise in the diplomatic corps. I mean, what's for a young person, what's needed? What parts of them do they need?
Well, I mean, people think it's academic. Academic achievement, yes, that's an essential. But everyone that applies has the requisite, academic qualifications. So we're not looking for the most highly intelligent person in the world. Like, we're not looking for the we're not sort of judging people purely on their academic merit. So you have to have a certain academic standard to get in. That's for sure. We all have that. But I think what we're looking for in the Foreign Service is, you look at somebody and you say, okay, how would that person do if I sent him or her to Saudi Arabia, which is, we have 2 diplomats there, maybe 3. And now, what if the ambassador got sick and had to go home? And this person was on their own representing Ireland in Saudi Arabia. How would they fare? So that's really what we're looking for, is people who have the flexibility, the adaptability, the sort of the common sense to be able to survive in an environment they're thrown into, and unexpected things happen to you. I mean, I, for example, ended up when I was in Malaysia having to cope with the Southeast Asian tsunami. Now, no training in the world, there's no academic course you could take that would tell you what you should do when you're in a tsunami situation and you have to try and look for Irish people who are missing, and then try to repatriate the remains of those who lost their lives. So there's no academic training. There's no training manual, indeed, for that kind of thing, frankly, because it's too generous. And you have to be able to respond to those things. And when you're looking at a candidate for a job in the Foreign Service, you're looking to see, what if that person was thrown into a situation which is unforeseen, unpredictable? How would they fare? How would they cope? So I think, if I were giving advice, I would say you have to have the academic smarts, of course, but you need to be able to show that you have something else in your quiver as well, that you're not just a one-lane highway, that you have a few other things to offer. So I think, evidence of having done other things, and a lot of people now, of course,
presumably, but
a lot of people now do serve. I mean, it used to be you had to go into the service straight from college, because I think the age limit was 25 or 26. Beyond that, you couldn't join. Now you can join any age. So typically now people do spend a few years doing something else, and therefore there's a bit of a track record there that you can look to. So, and then I think obviously, if you don't have an interest in the world around you, you should find another occupation. I mean, if you don't have interest, I mean, I would say the biggest,
you don't like travel, for example.
Exactly. But the biggest virtue that the best quality that a diplomat could have is curiosity.
Yeah.
Because you're sent to a place, you're new to the place, and if you're not curious, if you're not able to satisfy your curiosity by coming to terms with where you are, then you should be in some other profession. You have to also be highly flexible. You have to be willing, like, to go, I mean, to maybe move from Geneva to somewhere in Africa, you know, and that kind of, someone might very much like to be, you know, serving in New York, or yeah, but would they like to serve in an African country that they may never have thought about, you know? So you have to be willing to be adaptable and flexible, and to rise to challenges that you can't anticipate at the beginning of your career.
Great. Yeah, absolutely marvelous.
I
Thank you.
suppose, building on that, I mean, obviously the one thing that Ireland's diplomatic service, as busy as it is small. That kind of flexibility you're talking about. You are talking about some postings that are literally, you know, our man/woman in wherever. And there's literally maybe 2 Irish people and 3 or 4 local helpers. I mean, it's the scale somewhere around the world is small.
Yeah, we have a number of missions that are like 2-person missions. We don't have any one. We don't generally go for 1-person missions any longer, because there's some risks and difficulties with those. But you know, 2, 3, 4 people, diplomats in a mission would be the norm, and the exception would be a place like Washington, where we have 20, and a place like Brussels, where we might have 100, and someone like where like London, we might have, you know, 30 or so. So I mean, but most of our missions are small, and that's why, you know, dependability and adaptability and good judgment and common sense is at a premium, because if somebody finds themselves on their own in a mission, you want to be confident that they can cope with that situation, that they can do the job alone without any sort of supervision from an ambassador or whatever, you know. So, but look, most people, in my experience, adapt well to the challenges, and those who don't, generally speaking, leave the service and find other things to do pretty quickly. Usually the first posting is a telling moment in a career. If you take to it, your first posting will tell you whether you're suited for the job or not. And my first posting told me that I was suited for it. I married a diplomat from Australia, and she also had a kind of she was conditioned to the idea of moving around from place to place. Not everyone likes that kind of thing, but we happen to be okay with it. I mean, I can see there are drawbacks, and, you know, our children were, I think our daughter went to 9 schools between the age of 3 and 17, and our son probably went to 5 or 6 schools. So that's not ideal, obviously, from the family point of view, but our children have turned out well, so no complaints there either. But it is a risk when you drag kids around from place to place, and if the kids are not adaptable and are not sort of able to cope with those situations, then you can have a very bad sort of set of circumstances on your hands. But happily, we managed to avoid that, because we were in Brussels at a key time in the children's development, and there was an English, there's the European school there with an English language section to the school, and then we went from there to Edinburgh, where obviously they could be educated through English as well. So we managed to minimize that kind of disruption to our children, and they've, you know, everything worked out well for them. But it's a challenge for families, certainly, and then of course also for, you know, 2 career families. You know, it's no joke, because it's very difficult to manage 2 career families if one member of the family is going to be moving around the world every 3 or 4 years.
And in a funny way, Dan, I mean, obviously, I'm going to ask the obvious question, but in a way, what is the job in terms of, I appreciate if you're in country X, you've got to look after the Irish locals, that you're responsible for them, you help them out. But I mean, clearly the big thing is you're there to kind of represent, if not sell, Brand Island.
Yeah.
And how does that manifest? Does that change depending where you are? That clearly, if you're somewhere in the UK where there's kind of very tight ties in terms of Irish manufacturers, Irish exporters, that day-to-day stuff, which might not exist in, I don't know, Lagos. Are you selling the kind of the idea of Ireland?
Well, I think I always think of it as 5 strands, and maybe it's not 5, but I think it's 5. I must count them properly sometime. You know, the first is connecting with the government of the country you're accredited to. So in America, that means, you know, hooking up with the administration and Congress and listening to them so as to understand American policies from the horse's mouth, and then also getting them to understand where Ireland's coming from. So that's the first thing. It's representing your country vis-a-vis the administration you're accredited to. Second thing is the economic promotion story. Almost no matter where you are in the world, there may be a few exceptions, but there is an Irish economic interest to be served. And there are Irish companies that are investing in that country or selling into that country or have partnerships in that country, and you sort of support that effort. And in particular, you do it through working in tandem with Enterprise Ireland, IDA Ireland, Board BIA, and Tourism Ireland. So, you know, that's the kind of the economic promotion package, right? The third is, and this doesn't exist everywhere, but almost everywhere, but it exists in spades in the US, is connecting with the Irish community. Because the Irish community are usually a resource for Ireland, because in America, there's obviously a lot of people that identify with Ireland, 35 million perhaps, and then there are maybe a few million that actually strongly identify with Ireland and are active in Irish organizations and so on. And they're a great resource for Ireland. But even in a faraway country where there might be a small Irish community, generally speaking, the Irish there will be in positions of influence. You know, they'll be working for multinational corporations, or they'll be working for international organizations. And therefore, they are a resource for any embassy wherever you go. The fourth thing is obviously looking after Irish citizens. So that may entail consular work, which I did when I was in Thailand for the tsunami, where it literally meant going to morgues and searching for the bodies of deceased Irish people who had been lost in the tsunami. But it can involve visiting prisons to visit Irish citizens who were in jail. It can involve helping Irish people that get into difficulties of various kinds when they're visiting the country, or even when they're living in the country. And then the final bit of it is what I call telling Ireland's story. In other words, you know, telling the story of Ireland. And I mean, every country has a story, and there are different ways of telling it. And we're lucky because we have the Irish diaspora is part of the story, and they tell their own story and they help tell Ireland's story, right? But there's our literature, there's our culture, there's the whole gamut of things. So I particularly enjoy that part of the work, is getting out there and giving talks at universities, cultural centers and so forth, and basically trying to explain Ireland to people out there. In America, the main audience for this is Irish Americans who of course know Ireland to some degree, but you always have to top up their knowledge because, you know, especially those who maybe haven't been to Ireland very often may have sort of dated ideas of what Ireland's all about. So you have to keep sort of nudging people in the right direction by sort of, you know, bringing them up to date with how things are in Ireland and so on. So I like to do a number of things. I like to talk to audiences about Irish history. I just did a webinar just now with New York University. It's a series that I'm doing called The Farther Shore. And today we were looking at the transatlantic influence on Irish independence with a number of academics who were part of the panel, and I was part of the panel as well. And it was a fascinating sort of exploration of that issue. And, you know, we had an audience there and we put it on our Facebook page. So that's kind of public diplomacy sort of, and I really enjoy that, of explaining Ireland, explaining Irish history to people. I'm not an academic historian, but I have a knowledge of history, which makes me capable of communicating with people and explaining Irish history to them. And I find there's a big market for that here in America, because a lot of people are interested in Irish history but don't know enough about it and are keen to know more. And then, of course, I also use Yeats quite a lot, and Joyce, to sort of, you know, explain bits of Ireland that can easily be explained through, you know, the life and work of those two great poets. And also every day I tweet Irish poetry. I use Twitter, I use social media a lot to try and convey to people around the place, you know, the reality of Ireland, what an ambassador does, what we do in America, Irish-American relations, all that story. So I tell the whole story through my Twitter account, which I'm on every day, you know, a number of tweets every day, just to sort of give people a sense of what I'm doing. Because there's a lot of people who think diplomats spend all their time at cocktail parties having refined conversations with fellow diplomats. And that isn't the reality at all. I rarely go to one of those events because I find them to be not particularly useful. You know?
And can I just press that a little bit, actually? I thought it was really nice, those 5 different components, so they're not quite compartmentalized, I'm quite sure, of the work of a diplomat and that. But I imagine that even over the course of your career, is that the emphasis has shifted from one of those to the other. And I wonder what's much more important now than was. And could you even dare to say what element of those 5 is likely to become much more important in the years to come?
Okay, well, I joined the Department of Foreign Affairs at a time when, if you were drafting a letter, a response to a member of the public who wrote in about whatever it might be, you had to start your letters with, I am directed by the Minister for Foreign Affairs to reply to your letter of the 4th of January, and here is the response. And you had to sign it for the minister. And the minister never saw it. But the fiction was that your only role was to represent the minister and the minister's views. And that's still the case, of course, to some degree. But there's much more openness now. And most of our ambassadors are on Twitter. So they're tweeting every day, giving people impressions of the work they do and tweeting about Ireland. And that's a huge transformation in the way that we operate. You know, I mean, for example, when I was in India, my ambassador there was a very good ambassador. He did a very good job. He wrote very nice reports, you know, but it was all, he would meet people at the foreign ministry or at dinners in the evening, meet senior people, and would then report about developments in Indian politics and the politics of the region, because that was the time when, just after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, so India was a kind of a listening post for all that was happening in Afghanistan. So the ambassador wrote a lot of, you know, very fine, elaborate reports, which are probably now available through the archives. They've probably been released because this is more than 40 years ago. So those reports are definitely available, and were very fine reports. But I don't ever remember my ambassador at that time giving a public speech.
Right.
Because that wasn't the job of a diplomat. You were it was a backstairs job. It was the corridors of power that you had to sort of penetrate. And that big change is that now there's much more public diplomacy. I mean, ambassadors are now the public face and voice and ears of Ireland, and they're out there in the public domain. They're public figures, and that's something that people have to get used to. And I don't think it's going to change. Now, of course, you have a responsibility, because I cannot cut loose and tell you what my personal view might be, because I can't separate my role as ambassador from whatever personal views I may have, if I have any. At this stage, after 43 years in the Foreign Service, maybe my personal views fuse with the official views that I articulate. I just don't know. I have to wait and see when I retire whether I'll suddenly become this kind of chameleon who will have all sorts of wild and wonderful views about the state of the world that I'll be able to share with people around the place. But
we're waiting for the moment.
Of course, if I were to behave in a kind of an irresponsible way, of course I'd be hauled back, and of course I would be. Dublin would spot it and they would sort of be onto us. And I mean, you know, that's never happened to me, but I mean, I'm sure it's happened to other colleagues who've stepped over the line in their social media activities, and you would get told by Dublin, this is not appropriate. You should, you know, delete that, you know, that tweet and don't go there again, you know. But that has never happened to me, because I'm not afraid of my shadow, but I am cautious, and I do think about what I put out, and I kind of vet it. I regard a tweet as a short press release, and it should get the same attention that a press release got when I was doing press releases, when I was head of the European division, when I was head of the press division in the Department of Foreign Affairs.
But the one thing in that, though, I mean, you have from very early on kind of embraced social media and been very good at it in terms of that kind of soft power representing Irish culture. Yes, it's a press release, but you wouldn't start talking about Irish poetry necessarily in a press release. And I think social media has given you personally a whole entree into, you know, poetry, culture, things that interest you, which also
which are relevant to the topic. Yeah, look, I mean, when I first started social media, I think people had their doubts about it. I mean, I remember when I first suggested to one of my younger colleagues in Berlin that I should start a Twitter account, they said, "Oh no, Master, you couldn't possibly do that. That would be very risky for you to do that, because, you know, you." But I decided to do it anyway, and I never had a problem with it. I'm just cautious. I'm careful. That I know that what I say on Twitter is the words of the Irish ambassador to the United States, and therefore I have to tweet with that in mind. And cutting loose and doing silly things, while it might generate a lot of additional followers for me, it would not be good for me. It would be good for Ireland, and I would never do it. So, but yes, you're right to say that the range of things you can do is expanded because you wouldn't get the opportunity to read poetry or to tweet poetry every day if you didn't have Twitter. You know, I mean, you can't imagine an ambassador 30 years ago being able to find a way of putting out a daily poetry tweet. Because I remember, like, when I first joined the Foreign Service, it was a wonderful publication called Ireland Today. Came out, I think, every 2 months. And it was a fantastic publication, because they recruited very good people, public figures, academics, artists, and so on, to write very good articles about Ireland. And it came out, and a lot of resources went into it, and it went out to every embassy every couple of months. When I got to Delhi, I discovered piles of these things sitting in the storeroom because we had no way of getting it to the people who would have been interested. We didn't know who they were, for example. I mean, there were a billion Indians. How would you find the kind of the 10,000 or 20 or 50,000 that were interested in Irish literature and would appreciate getting a copy of this of this booklet? So we had a circulation list, but you know, even that was costly because you had to post them out, and there was a cost involved in it, and the embassy had a limited budget. But today you have the opportunity to get stuff out to people through social media in ways that would not have been possible in the past. And for example, this week we produced 2 events, which were video events. We did Shades of Green, which was in lieu of the reception we would have been holding for 600 people here in Washington to celebrate St. Patrick's Day with the Taoiseach as our chief guest. We did this 1.5 hour Shades of Green with some stories from Irish America, a lot of music, dance, and so on. It was a 1.5 hour program. It's still online. It's going to be available for, you know, forever for people who want to view it. And it got very good responses. And then we did an hour-long program, a tribute to John Hume. That was all done by the embassy. We didn't bring in a production company. We did it ourselves using technology that's now available. And that's got its own website now, you know, remembering John Hume. And so we have resources now to do things and to reach audiences that we simply couldn't have reached when I first joined the service 40 years ago. Despite the resources we put into producing this wonderful magazine, Ireland Today, we simply couldn't get it to the people that would have wanted to read it. And now we can just press a button and people all over the world can read my latest blog on whatever it might be on.
Marvelous, marvelous, marvelous.
Joe, you have some poetry questions, I think.
Well, yes, actually, and Yeats and Joyce, something about those, if we can dare to ask it. Where did your interest in Joyce come? It's not that many years ago, I suspect, when an Irish diplomat would not have mentioned the name Joyce. And aren't I right that at his funeral in Zurich in 1941, am I right that there wasn't an Irish diplomat even attended? So things have changed, haven't they? Am I right?
He if you look at documents in Irish foreign policy for 1941, there's a document there when he was passing through Geneva about a month before he died. He had lunch with Sean Lester, who was then back in Geneva. He had been in Danzig, obviously, as the League of Nations representative there, and he was back in Geneva, and Joyce had lunch with him, and he reported on this. He sent a report to Dublin saying he'd met James Joyce and so on. Right. And then he wrote a report about a month later saying, sadly, I've heard that the great Irish writer James Joyce has died. And the then Secretary General of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Joe Walsh, who was a man of rather conservative outlook, wrote back asking, was he reconciled to the church before he died? Not a question that I think we would think it wouldn't be the obvious question to ask about Joyce. I think the answer is probably no. But again, I'm not sure that we would ask that question today. I'm sure we wouldn't ask that question today. But so that was the attitude. So, but however, obviously, like Sean Lester did meet him. So he obviously wasn't a pariah in any way. That, I mean, you know, the ambassador to the League of Nations met him and had lunch with him, entertained himself and his wife, and then, you know, and then reported on his meeting with him. So I don't believe he was a pariah, but certainly he wouldn't have been. You know, I mean, the very fact that Joyce is buried in Zurich and not in Dublin somewhere tells you a story, I suppose. While he had maybe a slightly ambivalent relationship with the state in the last 20 years of his life, nonetheless, you know, bringing him back in ceremony and giving him a state funeral was deemed to be the appropriate thing to do in the 1940s, the late 40s, when his body was repatriated to Ireland, whereas that never happened with Joyce, both because I guess Joyce wouldn't have wanted it, maybe, and nor would Nora have wanted it, and I guess the state mightn't have embraced him in the way that they were able to embrace Yeats.
Right, but what had changed is that you,
No,
of course, personally have embraced Joyce.
I certainly don't remember Bloomsday's when I was in India in the early 80s. I don't remember any. No, I did. I do remember. I still have a copy of it. I did give a lecture on James Joyce's Ireland to the All India English Teachers Conference in New Delhi in 1982. So even then, I was on the trail of cultural diplomacy, even though I didn't know what it was. I didn't have that phrase didn't exist, and I wasn't thinking in those terms. But I remember it was the largest audience I've ever spoken to, because it was 1,500 people. Because there are a lot of English language teachers in India, clearly. And I remember meeting a woman afterwards from Nagaland, who told me that she was teaching Joyce but didn't have a copy of one of his books. So I immediately gave her my copy of Dubliners and my copy of a portrait and said, here, take those up to Nagaland, and I hope it helps you teach your. But I was able to speak to an audience in Delhi. And of course, at that time, of course, that was a centenary of Joyce's birth, remember?
1982.
82. And there was actually, that's right. And the department actually commissioned an exhibition on the life and work of James Joyce. And I showed the exhibition at the All India English Teachers Conference. And I gave a little seminar there on Joyce. And then I gave a speech at the opening session. And I talked about Joyce and Yeats at that. So even then, in 1982, Joyce was part of our cultural diplomacy kind of armory. But certainly, when I went to I don't remember doing Bloomsdays in Brussels or in Vienna, but I certainly, when I went to Edinburgh, one of the first things I did in 1999 was to have a Bloomsday in our consulate in Edinburgh, and it was a great occasion. We had the very great fortune of having Owen Dudley Edwards there. You probably know Owen, the great Irish historian, son of Robin Dudley Edwards. And Owen is a great reader and a great dramatic sort of personality. And he read the Cyclops chapter, and it was one of the best. And I've made that my party piece now on Bloomsday, because I was so impressed by the way in which Owen read out, the list, the litany of the heroes and heroines of the Irish race. And he read that with great gusto, and I do the same thing now. I'm not as good as Owen Dudley Edwards, but I do my best, I'm
sure you do it wonderfully. Fabulous. Mike?
No, I was just going to...
No, go ahead.
I was just going to sort of move on from the poetry debate in terms, obviously, the one thing that people picked up when Joe Biden got elected as president was the fact he was always quoting Irish poetry. Yeah. And it's a thing that you do because that's what you're representing. Why is Irish poetry in particular seems to have this huge cachet within the United States? It does seem incredibly powerful, and in a way that Biden, and then upwards, downwards, the way people seem to connect with it, be it a Heaney, be it a Yeats, it does seem to have an incredible power to it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Yeats' second coming. A lot of Yeats' work is a speechwriter's dream, and I know myself from writing speeches. You love to find a quotation that you can decorate your speech with, because it looks good, it sounds good, and you're somehow, you're drawing on the canon for your ideas, and that's a good thing. So I know that in the era of Bill Clinton, even in those days, Heaney was used quite a bit by Clinton speechwriters, and Yeats was used a lot, and Joe Biden has used Yeats. And in fact, I've two great stories, and one is Bill Clinton there at the memorial service for Jean Kennedy Smith, which I took part in. I spoke at as well, and Bill Clinton spoke, and he spoke about arriving in Dublin late one evening from Belfast, having had a very long day, and he was eager to go to bed. He was tired, he was exhausted, and Jean Kennedy Smith met him at the airport and brought him back to the residence, and he was about to say, "Good night, Jean, I'm going to bed." And it turned out that she'd invited Seamus Heaney around. And he said he stayed up until 3 a.m. And he said at one stage, Jean Kennedy Smith said to Seamus, "Would you mind, Seamus, writing out a version in your own hand of the Curate Troy?" Which he did. And Clinton held it up and says, "This is it. I had it framed. This is the Curate Troy, written out by Seamus Heaney in his own hand back in the 1990s in Dublin." And he hadn't forgotten that experience. So that's a good example of how poetry, the power of poetry to actually make an impact on someone like Bill Clinton, who had the whole world at his footsteps, obviously, or at his fingertips as American president. But nonetheless, meeting Seamus Heaney was a powerful enough experience for him that he remembered it still, and he had the evidence of it in the form of Heaney's manuscript of the Cure at Troy. Yeah. And then, Joe Biden's, use of Yeats, and he always says, yes, that's what I want to say. On the campaign trail, he met this young man, Braden Harrington, who had a very, very bad speech impediment. And Joe Biden took him aside and gave him a copy of Yeats's poems and said, I learned to speak properly, to get over my stammer, by reciting and reading Yeats's poems aloud. And this week, as a gift to President Biden, we got young Braden Harrington to do a reading of The Lake Isle Free.
That's beautiful.
And he read the first verse, and then a Choctaw poet who was the first recipient of the Choctaw Ireland Scholarship, who just graduated from UCC last week, she read the second verse. And then the third verse was read by the young man with an African background who won the Poetry Aloud competition last year in Ireland. So it was a beautiful piece, and I know it moved the president very deeply when he got it, because he mentioned it in the meeting with the Taoiseach. How about that? Yeah. So that's the power of poetry to kind of break down, to kind of communicate with people in ways that you couldn't do in prose.
And in terms of that power, particularly, think about that thing where Biden joked constantly about, I'm going to recite Irish poetry at you, or you're sick of me reciting Irish poetry. The man who at that point was on his way to becoming president of America, he wasn't talking about Italian poets or British poets or South American poets or even American poets. He's talking about Irish poets. And the fact that's going to be on CNN, that's going to be on Fox, it's going to be across the kind of board in the country you're living in. How much easier does it make the job? Just in terms of, the man in the Oval Office is pushing your brand before you even get into the room.
Well, that's all. Look, no matter who's in the White House, no matter who controls Congress, our job is to connect with the administration of the day, not to be taking sides and being partisan, because you're partisan, you're fine. You might be fine for 4 years being partisan, but you might pay for it when the coin is flipped and a different party comes into power. So we've always managed to have, and for example, we have preserved this tradition of the Patrick's Day visit to America, going back, 50 years now. And it's been done by presidents with an Irish heritage, presidents with no Irish heritage, Republicans, Democrats, across the board, it's been done. And the last administration kept up that pattern. And in fact, President Trump appeared to enjoy very much the Patrick's Day events. He seemed to rise to the occasion and really seemed to enjoy what he was doing on that day. So, and he didn't have any Irish connection apart from the golf club that he owns in Clare. But nonetheless, the fact that it's been preserved throughout the last number of decades is a sign that it means something, not just to Republicans or Democrats, but it means something to Americans generally, and that's why it has this appeal. But obviously, having somebody in the White House who instinctively identifies with Ireland, is deeply proud of his Irish heritage, talks about it all the time, has always done it. This is not someone who's a Johnny-come-lately who sort of embraced his Irish heritage for political reasons, not at all. From the day that he joined the Senate, he was, an Irish American from Scranton, Pennsylvania, representing Delaware. And he spoke movingly, or he wrote movingly when he went to Ireland in 2016, that he quoted Joyce's quote that when he died, Ireland will be written on his heart. He said, Eastern Pennsylvania will be written on my heart, but Ireland will be written on my soul. And that's something quite extraordinary for an American president to say. And then he talks about Irish poetry and says, my colleagues in the Senate kept on to me saying, why are you always quoting Irish poetry? He said, they thought I quoted Irish poets because I'm Irish. I didn't. I quoted them because they're the best poets. So he has kind of, and also, if you look back, 40 years ago this year, the Congressional Friends of Ireland was founded. St. Patrick's Day, 1981. The second name on that list was Joseph R. Biden, Senator for Delaware. So he's been involved in the Irish journey from almost the very beginning, because that was the start of this Irish modern phase of Irish American politics influencing what was happening in Ireland. And Joe Biden was part of that from the very beginning.
That's marvelous. And indeed, can I just remind people indeed that you're very welcome to put up questions in the Q&A or down there in the chat. And may I just actually draw attention to one from Peter K. Murphy, and a great Irish name, Peter. Thanks for coming. A Boston College graduate, good, and a retired career American diplomat, even better indeed. Presently living in Monte Carlo, Monaco. Presumes that you, Ambassador, spent a good deal of time in Washington attempting to assure US support of Ireland's position, as we've just heard, and indeed he does, as we now know. And he wonders about the complex problems particularly involved with Brexit. And I suppose we have to come down to some of those hard questions. And Mary Byrne is coming in with a similar question, wondering, how do you see Brexit affecting the Ireland-US relationship, if at all? How do you feel about those questions?
Well, the first thing I would say is that the American influence on the negotiations that concluded last December with an agreement on a new partnership between the EU and the UK, which included a protocol on Northern Ireland, which guarantees that there will never be a hard border on the island of Ireland. That influence from the United States was profound, and I believe was critical to the outcome that was achieved, because the American factor weighed heavily, I think, in London. And was one of the reasons why I think the British government decided to do a deal with the EU. Unfortunately, that deal, while it's part of international law and it can't be backed away from, the interpretation of it, the implementation of it is causing some teething troubles. And the British government recently expressed themselves as wanting to unilaterally take some steps which would be in breach of the agreement. And that was ironic, because easily those issues could have been resolved through negotiation, but the British government decided for whatever reason to pull the plug on the negotiations and just do what they were trying to negotiate agreement to do. And that's a bad thing, because unilateral action undermines the relationship between two parties, and it doesn't bode well for future relations. But our interest in Ireland is to get over this hump, and to encourage a smoothing of relations between the EU and the UK. But it will require the UK to abide by its obligations under the partnership agreement, under the withdrawal agreement and the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I hope they will do that. I believe they will, because I think the alternative is too awful to contemplate. And already, we've seen the negative impact of of Brexit on trade and so on, and we need to deal with these issues. We need to smooth out any wrinkles there are when it comes to the implementation of the agreement and the protocol, but we can't get away from the fact that the protocol is international law, has to be implemented. We can talk about the wrinkles in the system and make the implementation smoother and more efficient, but we can't resile from an agreement that has been concluded and approved by both sides as late as December of last year. So it is rather worrying that the British are throwing shapes at unilateral action these days, which would undermine the agreement and also undermine the future relationship between the EU and the UK.
And obviously, Dan, I mean, you were in London when the Brexit referendum happened.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, I'm English, but I mean, I kind of always understood that you were dealing with that kind of mad strand of kind of English, particularly thinking, which was, vehemently anti-European, but it wasn't actually a very sophisticated standpoint. People didn't really think through all the consequences that Brexit would bring about. I mean, obviously, clearly one thing, and you're there in London representing Ireland, but I mean, one thing you're also there to represent is a Good Friday Agreement, etc. The English kind of voting public isn't particularly interested in Northern Ireland. It barely kind of registers anymore. Did you find it difficult to kind of dust yourself down after that result and actually say, okay, I now need to go out and almost be a voice in the wilderness against the red tops, against Boris and the way the Tory party was going, and actually start problematizing what Brexit would mean in terms of Northern Ireland, in terms of trade? Because my sense in 2016, people just hadn't thought that through.
Well, you're absolutely correct there. The assumption that was made during the referendum campaign was that it'd be all right on the night and nothing would change in Northern Ireland. This was that the concerns about Northern Ireland that were expressed by the Irish government and others in the debate leading up to the referendum, that they were they were exaggerated and wouldn't come to pass, and that everything would be fine, nothing would change. Unfortunately, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland at the time, Theresa Villiers, was a staunch Brexiteer, and instead of standing back and letting the debate take its course, she sort of intervened to assure everyone that there would be no problem, and that was that. Now, I decided that I had an obligation to Ireland and to the Irish community in Britain in particular, because they had a vote, remember. So I was very active. I was the only ambassador in London at the time who said anything about the referendum, because for most ambassadors that was a no-go area. But I felt that I had an obligation and a right to speak out. And to be honest, nobody really challenged that. Even the Brexiteers never really attacked me for taking the views I took. I mean, I never said to people, vote Remain, but I did point out in speeches, in media interviews, in my Twitter account, and in other ways, in podcasts and blogs and so on, I did try to point out the challenges that Brexit would bring to British-Irish relations, to Northern Ireland, to North-South relations in Ireland, to the border and all of that. So I did try to point out the complexities. But you know, during a political campaign, complexity is often the first victim of, you know, the need to argue your case. And, you know, people tend to simplify arguments and you know, things like take back control and all of that became the dominant phrases that in the end settled the campaign in favor of Brexit. And I think it's true to say that a lot of people didn't really grasp what Brexit signified. And now people in Britain are horrified that Brexit means having to fill out forms when you want to export your product to the European single market, and that's a realization that people should have had a long time ago. And I think our government spent the last 5 years, strongly sort of campaigning to get Irish companies and businesses to wake up and realize that this was a big problem coming down the tracks. And I think we're better prepared for it for that reason. I think in Britain, sadly, I don't think that the same degree of preparation was put in, because there was a kind of an assumption it'll be fine on the night, you know, we'll get what we want and there won't be any problems. And I think the problems of Brexit have been systemically underestimated, and are now those particular problems are coming home to roost.
Your ambassadorship at the embassy seems to have had great success in pressing the Irish case, which is your job in Boston. Indeed, I read in a newspaper recently an English diplomat saying that the Irish ran rings round us here. Now, whether that's true or not, the point is that you're pressing. I just wonder, actually, what are the buttons you press? What are the levers you pull? I mean, how do you use whatever power you have? Is this whispering into people's ears? Is this having off the whatever briefings? Or how do you get things to move in your direction?
Well, you talk.
and you do that wonderfully well, if I might say.
And you talk again and again.
Yeah.
This may not be true in academia, but in diplomacy, repetition is an essential tool of our trade, because you have to hammer home your point day in, day out in every forum you can find. Yeah. At the moment, it's webinars, and it's also emails, it's also phone calls, Zoom calls with people in the administration, with members of Congress. So my main points of contact on this issue officially would be the State Department. So the senior people in the State Department who deal with Europe, they're one of my target audiences. Yeah. And then there's the National Security Council and the people who deal with Europe there. Yeah. I would be engaging with them on a regular basis. And then, of course, on the other side of the house, of the fence, there is the Congress and the Congressional Friends of Ireland, and they would be a big target for the embassy as well. We constantly maintain contact with them, send them briefing and so on. So, and I engage with them myself personally as often as I can, invite them around for lunches, dinners, meet them, meet them, remotely, or meet them over, phone them. So I have a lot of engagement with congressional people, and all of that together is designed to ensure that they understand where Ireland's coming from. They understand the Irish point of view with regard to the Northern Ireland Protocol at the moment, and also to listen to what they're saying, to see how their thinking is evolving, and whether our arguments are actually being taken on board or not. But I think at the moment, I can say I'm confident that the understanding of the Irish situation and of the protocol and the issues around it in Washington is quite extensive, and our arguments have been heard in all the right places. Now, that doesn't mean the thing is closed and settled forever. We have to continue to put across our points day in, day out, because the world doesn't stop when people understand where you're coming from, because a new development will occur next week and we have to explain that again. We have to, respond to that. So I take nothing for granted, and I don't take any comfort from stories that the Irish are controlling the ball here. Not at all. I mean, we're up against a very, large and well-resourced British embassy, and I'm on quite good terms with the ambassador, no problems there. But I have a story to tell, and I'm going to tell my story. I'll tell it every day to any audience I can find, and I'll tell it as well as I can. And I'm hoping that my story will be heard and will have an effect on the people who listen to it. And I don't in any way, I don't see myself as in kind of competition or in opposition to anybody here. I see myself as telling our story and letting the integrity of our story shine through and take us where we want to go in our relationship with the United States.
In terms of telling that story down, I mean, obviously, the one thing I always think, I've done some work on St. Patrick's Day, and it gives Ireland this amazing opportunity that the leader of the country is, normal rules notwithstanding, would normally be in the White House. They can put it in their diary at the beginning of every single year.
Yeah.
It's the norm. And I think once you go back to the early 60s, so a Taoiseach gets into the White House, gets the audience, gets to meet the politicians and lawmakers, guaranteed every year. And I think I did some statistics, and if you compared it to the Finnish Prime Minister, they'd managed to get into the White House something like 6 times since 1945. So at that level, St. Patrick's Day has this huge power for Ireland, because, the idea that the leader of a different country is going to wear a green tie or a green dress or whatever they're going to do. Do you sometimes think, though, is that, that kind of, does that always that snide thing every year, normally when ministers are travelling, that, they're going on their jollies on St. Patrick's Day? Do you think Ireland misunderstands its diaspora? I mean, you're at the heart of it. You're there in a country where 32 million people want to listen to you because they identify with you and the country of Ireland. Do you actually think back in Ireland itself, apart from seeing tourists, etc., perhaps people don't actually understand the power of the diaspora?
Well, maybe not, but I mean, I think we're a lot better at that now than we used to be. I mean, there was a time, I think, when the diaspora was there and we plugged into them whenever we needed them. And we, if you read the documents in Irish foreign policy, you can see that there was a constant preoccupation, but it was a rather one-sided thing. We didn't really, we just kind of tried to stir them up whenever we needed them on whatever issue might have been current at the time. I think in the last, say, 20 years, with the immigrant support program and with the government's diaspora strategies having been rolled out now, a number of iterations of that strategy have come out. And I think it all points to a desire on the part of Ireland to both speak to its diaspora, but also to listen to them. So I think there's much more of a two-way dialogue now between Ireland and diaspora. So I think the understanding of the diaspora is gradually kind of evolving. Now, it doesn't mean, well, you can't expect everyone in Ireland to understand the kind of the diaspora the way Joe does, or you do, or I do, because I've lived here and I've met them. But what I've discovered really is as follows. In Ireland, we tend to think of the diaspora as, New York, cops and firemen, Boston, the Kennedys, Chicago, the dailies, you know, we think about the kind of the big sort of, you know, the big ticket items that are part of the folklore of Ireland, if you like, you know, Tip O'Neill and you know, Ted Kennedy and the great, you know, the grandees of the Irish political diaspora. And what I discovered is that it's not just there; it's everywhere. Yeah. Everywhere you go. I mean, I was launching last night the Irish network in Portland, Oregon, and in parts of Oregon, 20% of the population have an Irish heritage. Right? You go to Savannah in Georgia. The Wexford diaspora there is enormous. I mean, you go to the Catholic cemetery there, and every other tombstone from the 19th century is born in Wexford, died in Savannah. Yeah. They have one of the biggest St. Patrick's Day parades in the world in Savannah, Georgia. I was in Charleston, South Carolina. The Hibernian Society there has one of the finest buildings you will see anywhere outside of Ireland, an Irish building, which is built in the Greek sort of classical style. And they even have a slab of the Giant's Causeway outside the door. I'm not sure we'd approve of that these days, but it was brought back by some South Carolina Irishman from the Giant's Causeway back in the 1840s. And I suppose those days, you know, if you had a few bob, you probably would get a farmer to put it on a cart for you and ship it back to South Carolina for you. But anyway, so, you know, so everywhere I go, I mean, Texas, I've been all over the place. I've met Irish communities in every corner of this country. And it's a fantastic resource. And people, like, they may be 4 or 5 generations removed from Ireland. Yeah. But as we stay in Ireland, they have a grow for the country. They have a certain affection for Ireland that doesn't seem to wither or stale. And that's a remarkable phenomenon. And it's all got to do, in my view, with the history of Ireland. The fact that the Irish came to America feeling a sense of grievance about the circumstances in which they'd left, and they passed that sense down to their children and their grandchildren. Yeah. And furthermore, they weren't well received in America in the early days. There was an attitude, negative attitude towards the Irish, which went on into the 20th century. And that meant that they had a siege mentality, and they bonded together. Yeah. And their identity was important to them. And it was connected with the Catholic Church, the local parish, the Catholic schools, Catholic universities like Boston College and others around the country. All of those helped to create a sense of Irishness that other diasporas don't seem to have preserved to the same degree.
That's smart. And a lovely story that I think you're saying is that even if we're having fewer, of course, of first and second generation Irish, is that affection remains. And perhaps because of people's greater history or greater availability of genealogy and that even generations further back actually are more aware of and more concerned with and more deeply involved with their Irish heritage than perhaps they might have been in years gone by. So the future looks good for Irish America.
You shouldn't be complacent. You shouldn't be complacent, but the fact that it's passed down already from the 19th century to the 21st century is a sign that it has a certain durability to it, and we shouldn't despair about it. But we should also cultivate it and try to make it last and make it flourish in the years and decades ahead.
Absolutely, and you do it so wonderfully well. There are a number of questions here that we're not going to get around to. I'm sorry, actually, Tomás Carthy, Gurmil Magat, and a really useful question there that we can't just get to. And I see Martin Cully indeed, and that's one that I'm sure the ambassador himself would be happy to answer. Kerry Ellen and more. Listen, Gurmil Magat, Galer, Gurmil Magat, Dan, and Mike.
Yes, I'll tell you about next week, shall I?
Yes, please.
That's what I'm here for. Amongst other things. So next week, we are talking to Shamima Akhtar and Fiona Knocknan, both of whom are working on a fascinating topic around Ireland during the period of the British Empire and issues around race. And what they're both interested in is particularly visual culture. So Shamima looks at those great kind of world and imperial fairs of the 19th century and how Ireland chose to represent itself, how it intersected with different nations represented there. While Fiona looks at missionaries, those clerics who went off to Africa during the late 19th and into the 20th century, particularly looking at the interwar period, and what those missionaries, mainly Jesuits she looks at, what they actually did with their cameras, what they took photographs, how they recorded their journey. So it's going to be a fascinating discussion. It's 4:30 Boston time. Obviously, we're still an hour out, so it can be 8:30 again Irish time. Register on Eventbrite as usual, and if you have the Zoom address, you can use that one.
Yeah, that sounds totally fascinating, Mike. Indeed, will you speak about, maybe it's not a phrase that's using, about the Irish spiritual empire abroad? But there's a fascinating, incredible history there. And I think that next week is going to be a wonderful moment, particularly, as you say, visually, for us to explore and to remind ourselves of just how powerful that was. Great. Listen.
Brilliant. Dan, thank you very much.
You're very welcome, and greetings to you and to all of your viewers and listeners. It's been a pleasure.